Hey there. So, in this episode, the first episode of season one, which is all about my solopreneur journey, hence the name of the show, My Solopreneur Life, I talk about my family's entrepreneurial DNA, and I leave you with a very special prompt to think about how entrepreneurial people in your life, whether they are people you know or whether they're actually people that you've read about or however you've been exposed to them, how their entrepreneurial spirit has inspired you. Enjoy the show. Welcome to My Solopreneur Life. I'm Terry Pappy, your gracious host, and I am so glad you're here. I have a wonderful episode for you. Sit back, relax, and let's have some real talk about what it is to be a solopreneur. Hey there, and welcome to the first episode of season one of the My Solopreneur Life show. I'm so excited to do this. It's been a while since I've actually done a show, and so forgive me if I'm a little as I get going with this thing. But I'm so excited about what I'm going to be bringing to you as a listener. Sometimes that's a hard word to say, isn't it? So who came up with that, solopreneur? It's a spin on entrepreneur, but it's a fancy word for one-person business. Okay, so just say one-person business. Well, you could do that too. This is what you're in store for when you when you listen into this show, is my crazy antics and funny style, and I hope you enjoy it. Let me just preface this first episode, little explanation on season one of the show, which is really going to be about my journey as a solopreneur, my career, how I got started in business, how the entrepreneurial bloodline runs in my family. That's actually what I'm going to talk about in this episode. But something else I wanted to acquaint you with is, and you'll see this time and time again with every episode, I want to provide you some sort of prompt or inspiration or idea that is something you can do. Not just take away from my story, what I'm sharing, or when I get into guest interviews, what we're talking about with our guests, but I want you to be able to be in action with your work and with your business. And whether you're thinking about starting your own business, or you're just starting, or been doing it for a long time like myself, or you're burned out, wherever you're at in doing your business and going for clients and building your brand and all the things that come along with being in business. And there's a lot, believe me. And for those of you who have been doing it for a while, you know what I'm talking about. But I really want this show to be a support mechanism, an inspiration, a creative tool to help you just shave off some of that stress, drama, crap that comes along with being a solopreneur. More and more is coming as the show evolves. Right now, where it stands is it's going to be a seasonal show, and every season has a theme. This worked for me well in my last show, Simplify, Multiply. And every season had a specific theme, and that was the context for which I entered into a conversation with my guests. And we talked about whatever that theme was. And whether it was confidence, whether it was selling, whether around marketing, and just making business simpler and making it work better. That's kind of my thinking for this particular show. And the first season, as I mentioned, I want you to know where I've been and understand my thinking, because the way I've built my business, the way that I have developed the flow of how I get clients, how I do my work, kind of like how I treat my clients and how I have long relationships, how relationships are so important in business, especially when you're a solopreneur, that there are some things I've also done to deliberately limit my scalability. And I've done those for very specific reasons. And I will talk about that in this season. That's really all I needed to kind of like preface this particular episode, given that it's the first one of the first season of this show. And also this show, if you're listening on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, whatever the podcast player is, audibly, it's also a video. So if you go to YouTube, there is a video on my YouTube channel. So if you go to youtube.com/Terry Pappy, you will find my Solopreneur life. But you can also search on their YouTube podcast, which Google Podcasts is no longer. It's now called YouTube Podcasts. That's where you can find all those good things. And I like that. I like doing the video. See, here I am. Terry's on video. Oh my goodness. So thank you for strapping in and coming along with me. I hope that these shows are fun and lively and hold your interest. And you're not going to offend me if you play it at 1.5 speed. It's okay. Because I know my conversation pace can be a little slow for some. Anyway, all right. So let's get to the meat and potatoes of this episode. And it's so funny because when I was preparing for this episode today, I started thinking, oh, well, my dad started his business, and so he was entrepreneur. And then I started thinking, wait a minute, it goes beyond my dad. And the stories I heard through my family were that my great-grandmother, who was from England, and this is on my father's side of the family, she came from England and they settled in Jacksonville, Florida. And this is why I always had this affinity for Florida for some reason, because my family came here from the ship, if you will, way back when, and had settled in all through the South and Florida in particular. But anyway, she started the family there, and my grandfather started a preserving company, jellies, in Jacksonville. So they had a farm, and they grew Concord grape, they grew guava, and blackberries and all kinds of different things. But they were most known for their guava jelly. And it's so funny because when my dad's mother, my paternal grandmother, when she passed away and we were going through her paperwork, we discovered patents for the preserves. So we had 2 patents on Concord guava and guava jelly that my family registered with the patent office back in the 20s. And it's funny because as I was researching this ancient history, I mean, this is 100 years ago, right? And it's hard to find, as great as the internet is, it's hard to find the old stuff, right? And my family wasn't the best at keeping records or things like that. So the stories are fragmented, and I'm sure they got embellished at times or whatever. But I actually came across an article in the Tampa Times, and I'm going to read it to you because it kind of blew my mind. It's dated Monday, March 8th, 1926, and the headline reads, "An Inviting Field." In its issue of last week, the Manufacturer's Record, in its leading article on the sweep of industrial and railroad activity in the South, called attention to the fact that a few years ago, a man named Pappy established in Daytona, Florida, a small plant for putting up guava jelly. From putting up guava jelly, the company turned to watermelon preserves, buying watermelons in carload lots, and, of course, using only the rind, which makes a preserve unsurpassed, according to the testimony of everybody who tries it. Now that industry is so widely recognized that a recent traveler on an English steamship, seeing Pappy's jelly on the dining table, made some inquiry and was told that it was the best guava jelly that they could find, and it was used on all the ships of that line wherever they sailed. The industry is spreading so rapidly, and the product of the factory is being pushed by many of the foremost grocery houses, catering to exclusive trade in New York, Boston, and elsewhere, to such an extent that the company has found it necessary to build a large plant at Jacksonville. This is now underway. I just thought that was the coolest thing. When I read it, I was like, so the stories were true. Oh my gosh, we actually had famous jelly on cruise ships. So I really enjoyed finding that, and thanks for letting me share it with you. But that was the basis of the Pappy entrepreneurial strain, if you will, or DNA, to continue closer to my experience My dad, who was actually born that year, believe it or not, of when that article was published in 1926. And when he got out of the Navy, so he was in World War II and he was in the Navy. And when he got out of the Navy, and this is in Philadelphia, he got a job working at a nuts and bolts, a fastener company. It was a distributor based in Wayne, Pennsylvania, and he was a salesman. And so he was out there selling nuts and bolts to original equipment manufacturers, big companies. And my mother's brother, my uncle, was also working there. Well, at one point in the 60s, they decided to come together, form a partnership, and start their own fastener distribution business. And this was in the suburbs of Philadelphia. That was in 1968. And so my dad and my uncle Joe founded PM Fasteners, which was a nuts and bolts distribution company. So basically, the way it worked was they would buy from the actual fastener manufacturer, so a big steel company that would make ISO rated stainless steel, all these different types of nuts, bolts, washers, fixtures, things like that, in mostly metal, that they would buy them in bulk in these big kegs. I remember as a kid going into the warehouse and there were these big wooden kegs that were full, very, very heavy, of all these nuts and bolts. And they would get orders. So they had a sales force and they would go out to big companies like Hearst Gear Shifts, GE, Black & Decker, a lot of those blue chip companies back in the 60s and 70s that were just manufacturing so much in the United States. This is before everything got shipped overseas and was made cheaper elsewhere, like China, Indonesia, India, and things like that. So what they did was they would take orders for things that the manufacturers were building. So if they were building a washing machine, there were certain nuts and bolts and fixtures that went into that washing machine on the assembly line. And so we would get the orders. We had this assembly line that we would package specific orders for these manufacturers and we would ship them out. So we had a big truck that would make deliveries, and then we had a short truck that was for smaller local deliveries. And they had a warehouse, a building in where we lived. It was a very successful business for many years, and it's still thriving today. What was interesting was one of my summers, I think it was, I don't even remember, honestly. I might have been in like 10th, 9th or 10th grade. And you know how kids get bored in the summer. And so I went and I worked in the warehouse for a week. And the order that I was on was the Hearst Gear Shift. That's why I remember Hearst was one of their clients. We were assembling the bolts for manufacturing the Hearst Gear Shifts. And it was a small package, maybe had like 30 different, bolts and nuts and stuff. And I thought that was the coolest thing, to be working in there in the warehouse with the forklifts going around and everybody doing the warehouse stuff. And I'm sitting there and I'm getting my little fingers and I'm pulling out the hex cap screws and all these different, pieces and putting them in a bag. And then, of course, you have the little sealer that seals the bag and then that goes in the box. It was so much fun. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I don't know if I would have loved it week after week after week, but for that, couple of weeks I did it or however long I did it, I had a really good time. And it was just nice to see my dad in his work environment and my uncle too, and how much respect that they had from the people that worked there. And it was a wonderful thing to see business in action at such a young age. And I thought that was really cool that we had that experience. Well, many years into the business, my brother, Richard, who was the oldest of 4 siblings in our family, I'm the youngest, he was the oldest, and he started working for my dad's business. And so he learned a lot about sales, and obviously he had his own take on things. And he ended up running a branch in Baltimore. So we had several branches, mainly for distribution purposes. We had a North Carolina branch, we had one in Baltimore, obviously the Pennsylvania one. I think that was primarily it at the time. And so my brother running the Baltimore branch was doing really well. And so he bought the I guess, that branch, that portion of the business from my dad and my uncle, and rebranded it Sunfast. And he did very well with that business. He grew it as well. Now, you got to remember, this is a time when that was a very thriving business because we had so much manufacturing in the States. And as the economy shifted and larger corporations started shipping work overseas for manufacturing purposes to save money and keep costs down, and for all the reasons we're all aware of, it was something that started to affect the industry. But my dad's company and my brother's spinoff were they continued to do well. And so my brother opened branches in Puerto Rico, in South Carolina, and he did very well with Sunfast. He even became a private pilot, and he had his own plane, and he would fly and to see customers and things like that. And it was kind of cool to see him do that. And then his son, Paul, had started working in the business as well and now runs Sunfast. So Sunfast is still alive and well, as PM is, and in South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina. And I'm super proud at what my nephew has been able to do, because not only has he survived and flourished through a pandemic, downturns in the economy, changing in manufacturing, where a lot of this normal metal fastener type businesses are building things overseas. And of course, they're buying their fasteners overseas. And so he's expanded and completely shifted the entire product line to accommodate the way things are being built today in the US. And he's able to really leverage his manufacturers of the product and then distributing it to the manufacturers here in the States. BMW, for example, is one of his customers. He's totally transformed the family business. He's adapted to economy. I'm definitely going to have him as a guest on my show in the future, because he's just so wonderful to share a lot about sales, relationship building, how you have to adapt to a marketplace. And even though he's technically not a solopreneur, he's a great example of the entrepreneurial spirit, as well as being able to deal with having a workforce, being able to deal with changes in the economy and those types of things. Now, I can't forget my sister Jane, who also was a solopreneur. And Jane lived in Pennsylvania as well. And she went to college to get a occupational degree in occupational therapy. She was a OT, and she decided to primarily work with children with muscular dystrophy, MS, cerebral palsy, a lot of the kids that were wheelchair bound, that were having some sort of physical challenge. And she would work with these kids, and they built their house, and it was like an upside down house, like all the bedrooms and living area were up top. And then there was this huge rec area underneath, and it was a passive solar house. I remember this house. It was really cool. And she had all types of like mats and balls and all of these therapy tools that she used for these kids that would come around. They'd get brought in by their parents, and they'd come in and they'd work with my sister. And she was so tender and so it was like she was born to do this work, and she was so good at it. I loved watching her, in her element, working with these kids, and just the way she talked about it. She had just such a gentle, calming air about her energy, which is completely opposite of mine. I'm kind of like a spaz. I'm all over the place, right? But that's the thing about siblings, there's no two that are alike. Even twins are different. And so she also was an entrepreneur and had a wonderful career taking care of these kids and working as an occupational therapist. So that's pretty much, the gist of the threads of entrepreneurialism in my family that I was blessed with, if you will. And I think I've always kind of had the, orientation toward having my own freedom, having my own, way of doing work, and just kind of being the master of my domain and my future and the experience I wanted to have. And so I'll be sharing like how I got started and everything in a couple of episodes here. You'll believe me, you'll get so much about me. You'll be like, oh God, Terry, please, can we talk about something else? Oh my goodness. So, but I just thought that was really kind of cool. And that's why I love my last name because there is so much wonderful history, especially Florida history attached to it that I'm super proud about. And plus it's a super fun name. You got to love it. And, that's just kind of where I'm coming from when I do my thing. But I had always had this desire to have a lot of freedom. And honestly, I'll tell my story, like I said, in a future episode, but it's really interesting what the pandemic did for solopreneurism and what it provided people. Technology with the internet, access to digital information, being able to communicate via video, via Zoom or Google Meet or whatever the video live chat du jour is of the day. And there's like no barriers. There's no barriers to publishing a book. There's no barriers to publishing a show like this. And anybody who wants to get out there and do their thing can do it. It's pretty easy. So having the desire to do it, that's where you start. It's one thing to have a job where you're just kind of like, oh God, this job. Believe me, I've had those. And it's another to be, okay, I want to be under my own power. I want to make my own choices. I want to work with people I choose. I want to do the kind of work that I'm passionate about, that lights me up, that, is just my highest excitement. And that's kind of where I'm at today. And I'm hoping for you as a listener that you rediscover that passion if you kind of got detached from it, that you understand that, yes, passion will drive a business. However, it's your talent, skills, and experience that make it viable. And you have to have both. You have to have the passion, which drives the emotional energy behind what you're doing. And it also helps keep your mindset in the right lane. But you also have to understand that people are buying something from you that solves a problem that they have. So if you have a specific skill, talent, expertise, or experience, and you're bringing that to bear to fix their problem, that has value and you can charge for it. And business is that simple. When you're creating value that solves a problem that people have, all you got to do is find the people. And there you go. You're all set. And we'll be talking a lot about that and sales and marketing and all of those things. So, because when I went to college, I was like, I want to be in commercial art. At the time, it was like the late 70s. I graduated high school in 1980. And I was like, I want to get into graphic design and commercial art. I want to design ads. Now, remember, this is all before, desktop publishing and the stuff we have today, which is like, oh my God. But I learned some incredibly valuable trade skills that gave me a wonderful backbone for design and for writing and for all the things that I bring to bear as far as the skills and talents that I have when I take care of my clients and solve their problems. So I'll be talking a lot about, you'll hear much in that area as far as communications, customer experience, sales. That is my wheelhouse. So when it comes to tactical guidance, that's where I'm going to really be diving deep into how to get stuff done, how to simplify what you're working on in your business. Because believe me, when you're a solopreneur, there is a lot to do, a lot. And for those of you who have been doing it, you know what I'm talking about, right? So let me just close out this particular episode with this. Take a moment to think about how entrepreneurialism showed up in your life. For example, my family's history with everything they've done, from Pappy's Jellies to the nuts and bolts to my sister's work. It's all signing for you, meaning it's showing you signs that there's more than just the job. There's more to life. You can design your business. You can go out on your own and create something amazing. Even if you do like what my dad and my brother did, and my nephew, they give many people many jobs over the years. And there are people that are at PM still that started with my dad, believe it or not. They're up there, but they're still there. And I just think it's remarkable that you can create any type of business that you want and be successful. And in today's world, there's really no excuse to not do it. And not that I'm trying to convince everybody to start their own business, but it's possible. And when you're wanting to do it, but you come up with all these excuses. Oh, I got to support a family. I can't do that. There are ways around it. So understand that those excuses are just trying to keep you safe. That's normal and bound to happen. We're going to talk a lot about that stuff. Oh my gosh, there's so many things that I'm going to be covering in this show. So what I want to leave you with is this prompt. I started saying it, but now you're going to find I digress quite a bit. So sorry about that. What I'd like for you to think about is, where has entrepreneurialism shown up in your life? Where has it inspired you? Where has it manifested in something that you've taken on, whether that's a project or something that has really inspired you to do your own business, or maybe do the job that you have right now, if you're still employed, a little differently, a little bit more of an entrepreneurial spirit. Or maybe it's inspired a hobby that is just a little side hustle that, whether it's crafting or whether it's, writing resumes for people or whatever. It doesn't matter. Take a second to look at how you've been inspired to be entrepreneurial. And those inputs aren't just people around you. Like for me, it was a lot of my family, but I also read a lot of books about people who started their business. I read articles, I heard stories, I met people who had businesses. Obviously, my clients have businesses. On my last podcast, Simplify and Multiply, I interviewed, over 100 people about their work, their business, how they got started, what they're doing and everything. And there's so much of it out there. It's really, truly inspiring. So when you think about what inspired you from an entrepreneurial perspective, really think about, what was it about entrepreneurialism that inspired you, that attracted you, that lit you up, that made you think, wow, like maybe if I start getting into real estate, I could be doing this, that, and the other, and whatever it is. Take a moment to just reflect on that. Look at how it's adjusted your path and how it's given you like the fuel to, just go crazy with where you want to go with your career, with your work, and with the business. So that's your prompt for this particular episode, is to think about that and really value how it's impacted you and how it will continue to. Because I think that whether it's a show like this, or whether you read a book or hear a podcast that is focused on entrepreneurialism, it's incredibly, a positive thing to keep your mindset buoyed. And because it's easy to kind of get in the doldrums and feel a little overwhelmed when you're a solopreneur. So having those examples and those mentors and role models in your life, even if you're just observing, is really valuable. So take a moment to think about what has inspired your entrepreneurial spirit, and I will see you in the next episode. Well, I know you're disappointed, but that's it for this episode. Listen, the great news is there's another one coming, so stay tuned. Anyway, I just want to make sure that you do the prompt. If this episode had a prompt, and you get that homework done, because you're going to be a better solopreneur. How's that for a maternal finger shaking at you? Hey, listen, thanks so much for being here, for giving me time of your day, and, for taking it on. So if you want to learn more and stay connected with me, just head on over to mysolopreneurlife.com. Thanks a bunch. See you soon. That was pretty good. I think I'll keep that one.